Okay, we're going to jump in and get going. It's 5 after 2, and we might get a few more people to join, but at any rate, we've been holding steady at about 23. So you all might be able to see that about 100 people or so, well, really 85, because that 101 number that you might see factors in the folks that are on the webcams today and also VegFund staff. So this is a good turnout of about 85 other people of you out there, activists who have joined our webinar today when bad luck happens to good Vegfests. So you may have noticed toward the back quarter of this year that we've tried to be much more active at VegFund of bringing you some skills development webinars, and that's a trend that will continue into 2019. So we thank you for attending today, and we thank you for the other webinars that you may have attended in these past couple of months. All of the webinars are available, they're being recorded. So if there is an associated presentation, that plus the recording is available. If you have not received that and you would like to, just go ahead and email us, or you can also find that on our website at vegfund.org. So we're delighted that you all joined this webinar today, and we thought this would be a fun and interesting topic. And admittedly, the thought that popped into my mind, first off, it's that wonderful Facebook site that you all are very active on. There's such great information there. And, we thank you for being so active on that Facebook site that was started by, you all, the practitioners, and is populated regularly by that. And we saw an opportunity from the Facebook site to simply pick up on some of those topics and potentially go a little deeper from time to time. And so what came to mind are the poor folks at DC VegFest when they had a catastrophe of weather recently, and they had their VegFest canceled, kind of by federal order that the DC government, DC was shut down for the purposes of the hurricane. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, wow, that must happen to people all the time. There must be all kinds of catastrophes and calamities that happen to people and really mess up, their plans and all the work that they've done for their VegFest. So we thought that this might be an interesting topic. So as most of you know, we went out onto the Facebook site and just said, hey, would folks be interested in participating in a webinar to talk about some of the things that you do to manage these times of catastrophe? How do you plan for that? What is your actual response? And what can you do to avert disaster into the future? So literally, we just took the first 4 folks who were willing to serve on a panel who are in front of you, including Helene Greenberg from Triangle VegFest, Jenna Bardoff, Solutionary Events, Richard Rogers from Philly VegFest, and Megan McNames of Indy VegFest. So I'm guessing that all of you out there know each other because we all show up at AR and other venues. But it's nice to see these folks online. And the format that we'll go forward with today is everyone you see on the webcam, not myself, but the VegFest participants are going to give a short introduction of themselves, and they're going to introduce one of their catastrophes or calamities that brought them to this panel. And from there, we'll conduct kind of a panel discussion of how they manage some of these things. I'll be asking some questions in a round robin format. And you two out there, you're listening, if something comes up, feel free to chat in some of your thoughts as well. But just to let you know, we'll allow at least a half hour of time, maybe 45 minutes, for you all to participate, to share your catastrophes, how you managed it, and for us to just have an open discussion online. So again, thank you so much for all the work that you do. VegFund is in a very privileged spot to be able to take a peek into all the fabulous work that you do, and we would not exist if it were not for you all. So we thank you for being out there each and every day and making our work possible. And really, we're just in awe when we stop and contemplate and take a look at our data and look at all the really great things that you guys are doing. And your work is sincerely appreciated because we would not be without you. So thank you to the folks who are on the webcams, but also for all of you listening. really congratulations to all of you for what was another great year. We think that we've made the greatest number of grants this year than we've ever made, and that's because you guys are out there working it. So we really appreciate it. And we always look forward to seeing you at AR. It's so fun to go to AR and see people who you've only known kind of on paper, if you will. And then, you get introduced to people and you're like, oh, that's who you are. So it's really fun. And today's no exception to that. So let's jump in and let's just start at the top. So Helene, can you introduce yourself and also at least one catastrophe or disaster that you've had to deal with one of your VegFest or similar type events?
Sure. Well, I'm Helene. I'm Triangle VegFest, Wilmington VegFest, and for 2019, we're ending Columbia, South Carolina VegFest. And it's been 5 years for Triangle VegFest, and for the most part, it's been pretty smooth sailing. But in 2017, I moved the event to a new location in Durham, and when I spoke to the venue, they told me I didn't need to contact the health department. Yeah. And so I went along. I was like, oh, I don't need the health department. And I said, oh, vendors, you don't need the health department. You don't need the TFE permit. It's $75 here. We could just go. It's a private building. It's inside. Well, Friday morning, like around like 8:30 in the morning before VegFest weekend, I get an email or a phone call, one of the two, probably both, from the health department, from the Durham Health Department. And they say things like, you're violating health code. You're supposed to contact us. We can shut you down. And I just went through the most hellish time in 5 years of organizing any event, because it led to me having to have a ton of conversation with the health department, with the event being in 2 days, but the deadline for the health department being 15 days prior to the event. On the phone, he was more amenable to working with me. In email, it was all new. So I didn't quite know what to go with. But there's like this nifty thing in North Carolina for a nonprofit. The food vendors can fall under the nonprofit and fall under our umbrella. There's some other things involved, but I just said, let's do that. I was like, let's do that. And the health department, he was like yelling at me because I said, I've done this in other counties. I haven't had any problems. He goes, so if you've done this in other counties, why didn't you know to contact us? I'm like, uh-oh. Because I was told I didn't have to. Well, can you show us that you didn't have to? They told you that? I searched my email, which I thought was in there, and it was all verbal. And I was just like, I'm telling you, I would not put myself through this hell if I didn't have to. I know how to work with the health department. I have no problems with the health department. We would have contacted you. We would have known about this. So I ended up losing 2 vendors. Whole Foods was one of them. It was going to serve Beyond Burgers at the event, which was a big deal. And I lost a vendor from Charlotte who just, with the fear of coming and spending the money for the health department to show up to shut us down or to shut down certain vendors was enough for them to be steered away. But a lot of the vendors came, and I just said, here's what you need to do, and just follow the health department guidelines, do what you would normally do, wear your gloves, wear your hairnet, clean the water basin, do everything you're supposed to do. Don't make anybody sick. And we'll just roll the dice and see what happens on Sunday and hope the health department doesn't come. They're overstaffed. No, I'm sorry, understaffed. They don't want to come out on a Sunday morning unless they have to. I know these things. They're like, well, we'll be there. And I'm like, who's going to come out on a Sunday? Like, you don't want to be there when you have to be there. So we rolled the dice, and they didn't come. And I just lost those vendors. But what the coolest thing is, you have to make a positive out of it. I said, how did you hear about the event? Right? How did you get wind of that? And he said, on a listserv in my community. I was like, that's so cool. And this is what I said to him on the phone. I was like, that's like really cool. You heard about the event from the listserv in your community. That means the event's really getting out there. Granted, I don't like this, but I'm like really happy that the community in Durham knew all about the event.
So, yeah, Helene, that's that's an amazing example. Thanks for putting that out there by way of introduction, and a lot to learn from that one. So thank you. And we'll come back to some of those lessons learned. But how about you, Jenna? What happened? What was introduce yourself, please, and give us an example of one of your catastrophes.
Yes, I'm Jenna. I'm a volunteer with Solutionary events, one of the event coordinators. And we're a network of festivals that happen all throughout the state of Florida and hopefully eventually beyond Florida. We've had a number of calamities at each of our events, and I think the one I'm going to talk about is the one that I really thought was going to shut us down. Each festival, we've had that kind of moment where we're like, oh man, how are we going to get through this? And then we do, and the event's really successful, and we're really happy. So I'm not going to talk about those festivals. I'm going to talk about the one that was the real challenge, and that was one that we had pretty recently, and that was surprising to our team because we had been doing festivals for quite a while. We had a lot of experience, and at this point we figured we have it all figured out. Clearly we don't, and I don't think anyone ever is going to have it all figured out. And so that was a really important lesson to us, is that we're never going to be able to prepare for what happens, but we need to know how to resolve those issues when they come up. So what happened at our recent event was we had about 60 volunteers signed up to come. There was something going around. Everybody was getting sick, and we had close to 50 volunteers cancel. And we had them not cancel a month before, not cancel 2 weeks before. We had them cancel the night before. And not only did we have volunteers that were supposed to come the day of cancel, some of our team members had emergency situations and they had to cancel too. So it ended up just being a really small handful of volunteers who were on our core team that had to make this entire festival happen with over 100 vendors. We had speakers, we had food demonstrations, we had a kids zone, we had yoga zone, we had an artist demonstration area, and we had no one to run any of these sessions. So basically, the night before we started panicking a little bit, but it was myself and my partner that we realized we need to focus, we need to get this event together. So we spent, I'll rewind a little bit. In the morning, we were supposed to put up a 20 by 40 tent at this location. We supply our own tents to save money on rentals since we do so many frequent events. So we had a 20 by 40 tent that we were planning on cleaning up, wrapping up, and bringing to the festival to set up with a few volunteers that were supposed to come out to the event Friday before the event was supposed to happen. I go out to wrap up the tent, and a frog had laid her eggs in a puddle of water that was sitting on the tent while we were having it out there. And a bunch of tadpoles were in this tent. And being the animal lovers that we are, we can't just remove them from their home. So we ended up deciding that we had to forfeit the 20 by 40 tent because we didn't want to harm these tadpoles, and we didn't want to let them see that anything happened to them. So we ended up having to decide we needed to figure out a new situation, what we were going to do with the speaker tent since we no longer had a 20 by 40. We ended up using the 20 by 20 tent that we had and found a shadier area that we could put it in, which ended up being a calamity the day of because it wasn't shaded enough, so that the projector didn't work and no one could see the screen, and there weren't enough areas for chairs, so there was that. But then the night of, we said no more 20 by 40, let's just get the park set up. We had a few volunteers came in late from out of town, and we were afraid that they were going to be exhausted for the day of because they had a lot. We already knew that all these volunteers were canceling, so we said we need our core team in full operational. We need them to be able to do their very best on Saturday. So we sent them home early. We said, Kevin and I can get this all done. You all need to get your sleep. And my partner and I, Kevin, we just ran around the entire night getting things set up. We wanted everything to be done since we knew we weren't going to have any volunteers in the morning to help us. So we had to get all of the tents set up. We had to get all of the banners and signs put out. We had to get the whole park flagged. We needed to, which was help. Our president came to help with that too. but we ended up, it was on the night where they had what's called First Friday in St. Petersburg. So it's this big giant party. And there were people who were very intoxicated coming to talk to us the entire time we're trying to set up. We had people trying to get into the restrooms that were locked up. So we had all sorts of distractions the whole night. Then the security guard came, and his car battery died. So he was stuck inside of the park, and we needed to get him out by morning. So that was another thing. Then we needed to figure out how to get this poor security guard off of the property before the event started. We didn't have time to go home and shower. We were in our smelly clothes. I was covered in pond scum because I was trying to see what I could do in the morning from these poor little tadpoles. And so we were just, my partner and I were filthy dirty. And then we were planning on running home and showering. But by the time we looked at our clock, the event was about to start, and we had to keep going to get everything ready for the day of, to get ready for vendors to come in. We didn't have anyone to help us with getting vendors set up, so again, we had to run around, get these vendors set up, try to help them find their spaces. There were some elderly vendors that needed help with getting their items to their space, so I had my dad come, and he was using his manpower to run from place to place to get this together. So by about 1 o'clock, Kevin and I had our hands in our head thinking this event is still not together as we were envisioning it to be. And financially, we were a complete wreck. And we just thought, this is the last event we're going to do. We have no help. I don't know how. We thought we knew what we were doing, and here we are. We are completely lost. We feel like we're complete beginners all over again. And it was a rough day, and it was very emotional. I blacked out around 2 o'clock, and Kevin had to pick me up, and he dragged me home so I could get an hour of sleep before I had to come back and pack up the entire event. By 5 o'clock, when the event was over, we were really fortunate to have the vendors and all of our wonderful friends who saw how exhausted we were and stepped in to clean it up and to make the event finally over. I think it was around midnight when we were finally done with everything that we needed to do. And my partner and I we were a complete mess. We said, we're never doing an event ever again. This is the last festival we're coordinating. I sent out an email to our team, and I said, that's it, we're done. I'm so sorry, I can't do this anymore. And then I let a few days to kind of resonate on that. And we ended up having a meeting with a few members of our team. And it turns out a lot of our members work with other organizations as well. And so they also have similar experiences of moments of defeat. And we kind of chatted about it, and we realized, we're all struggling with the same thing. All other VegFest organizers have these experiences at some point with some kind of calamity. And instead of taking it on ourselves to solve these problems and to take in these emotions and the mental and the physical stress, it's time that we start to reach out to other people and say, we really do need help. We need everybody to get involved with these, not just volunteers, but to have a solid core team of other experienced event coordinators that want to make the world a better place. And I think we just need to start creating a stronger network of people that say, I see you're struggling, and we don't need to struggle anymore, because if we have more support, if we had a stronger core team for that event, we wouldn't have had to worry about the volunteers not showing up. And I think that's what lesson we learned is just we need to become stronger as a community and as a network of festivals to say, if your festival is struggling with volunteers, if you're struggling to find a committee, reach out to other organizers and say, how can you all help me, or how can we help you? And to start being a resource for each other.
All right. Wow. That's an incredible example. Whoa. I don't know. I think you guys were sandbagging when I asked for examples, because I didn't know it was this detailed of disasters, because these are really great. These are great examples and good case studies. Thanks for sharing that, Jenna. And we'll come back to some of the things that you've just said, you and Helene. How about you, Richard? What happened to your VegFest?
Hey, thank you. I love your story so far. My story is not one that really tells about something that happened right before VegFest or during the VegFest, although we had our share of hiccups. But the event itself went off really well. But I'll go back to the beginning when we were in our planning stages. For Philly VegFest, the reason I came on board to work on it was because Philadelphia had originally 2 years of a VegFest in 2014 and 2015, and at that point it was a event that was run by the Humane League of Philadelphia, and they used this as they're not a giant group, but they're a really powerful group. And at that time, they were just treating the VegFest as a fundraiser for their organization. After 2015, the VegFest kind of went away. And at that point, I still am to this day, I was working on a nonprofit Facebook forum called Let Food Be Thy Medicine. And the guy who founded that is a gentleman named Bill Krafso. And Bill, through our work in the vegan circles in the area, we were all doing different sorts of things. But Bill and I came together at one point, and it's soon after that asked me to be an administrator on his forum. So the neat thing about these forums online is that what people don't understand when they're just members or when they're participants is that the admins always have a back channel somewhere where they talk about what's happening on the forum and they converse about whatever admin duties they have to take care of. But also on that back channel, what happens is you build these relationships with people that maybe you've never met in person, who are your other admins. We're spread out throughout the country. Fortunately, Bill and I were actually both in the same Philadelphia area, so we had met in person a couple times, but still, not knowing each other, this bond started to form online. And because of that, he had let me know one day, because you guys we're talking like 24 hours a day on these things with your admins. But Bill had let me know that he was looking into the disappearance of Philadelphia VegFest. And this was in 2016. He said, eventually got back to me and said, I have a meeting with the grassroots coordinator of VegFest. Would you like to come with me? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll come. So we drove out somewhere, met at Starbucks with Rachel Black, who was then the grassroots coordinator. And Rachel came with a stack full of papers, had all of her information with her, and we talked. And we could tell that they were really excited for somebody new to be taking on this experience. Bill had never worked on a festival before. I have experience just working on some arts festivals in another town nearby. So I knew that it was something we could handle when I heard the size and the scope of what they were doing. I was kicking him under the table, telling him, yes, let's do this. So we left that meeting as the new organizer. We looked at our situation. We knew we had plenty of time before we were going to put together a 2017 VegFest. And we just set to planning. We were working out how we're going to work the organization since we don't have one. Do we want to find another organization that might let us be their producers of a fundraiser? Do we want to start our own nonprofit? Do we just want to go at this as two volunteers and put our own money up? So we were doing these things. Bill had great contacts with many of the doctors and speakers we followed because of the forum. So his job was going to be locating people, using the phones because he's home all day working on the forum. My job was going to be bringing my festival experience to this event, and I would handle logistics and those moving parts. And it got to be around, it was September of 2016, and the last time we met was over at Phoenixville VegFest. It was I think their first VegFest or their second VegFest, I guess their first one. But anyway, Bill and I went out there. We were meeting different vendors, just looking at ideas about what we maybe wanted to do. And the unfortunate thing that occurred was at that VegFest, that was the last time I ever saw him. He passed away that week, which was just nuts. There's a whole story that goes along with his disappearance and going with the police to find his body, but that's not important for these purposes, but it is an interesting story we tell at VegFest. But suddenly there I was without this wonderful man, first of all, who brought me to this event. And all our planning had just gone away because Bill was missing and had passed away. So good things came out of that as far as getting to meet with his family and sitting Shiva with them and telling his family about all the wonderful things he was doing. But at the same time, after the long mourning period passed and I got myself back to thinking about the event we were going to put together, I didn't even know where to start, because we had worked out enough of an understanding as to what our roles were going to be and the amount of work that we really had to do. So I hemmed and hawed and went back and forth, and at times I was ready to move forward, and then I looked at the amount of work that was there and wondering how to approach it and just didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just let myself take a pause and thought, let me get through this period of experiencing his death. Having not been friends except for online, really, that's when I understood all of a sudden what I explained to you earlier about the back channel and the communication that we had as admins. And Beverly had formed a relationship that was pretty strong with this person, and I didn't expect the mourning period that came. So I just kind of had to shut down and leave everything alone. It got to be at a point where I realized, well, if I'm going to do this event, I have to pick a date to give myself enough time to work for a June 2017 event. And it just got to be too late, and I just stopped and put it down. And when I finally was ready to work with it again, I thought logically that I'm okay with working with a small core of people, because the arts festival I worked on was mainly two of us and maybe one other person doing this thing. So I knew I could put it together. I knew it was a lot of work. But I started thinking about the people we had met in the Philadelphia area who were really powerhouses in the vegan community there. And two people came to mind that I called and started a meeting with. There are two people who have a new store actually in Philly called V-Marks The Shop. They run all these vegan pop flea markets, Carmela and Carlo. They're powerhouses in Philly for the vegan community. And Bill and I had both taken a really strong liking to them. And remember, we had said to each other, if we have to call on some people, let's call them, because we really like them. So I called, and Carmela, in her normal cheery demeanor, and same with Carlo, she said, well, we thought the same thing about you guys. And, so we met and just started talking about the event. And the interesting thing was that they also had talked to many of the people from the Humane League in preparing for the different events that they were putting together. So we had a lot of similar ideas. And what they offered me at that point was tons of phone numbers, tons of support, ideas about what they thought was needed in the Philadelphia community. And they said, any way that you want us to work with you on this, whether it be in a large way or just in the background, you have our support. So what I'm getting at is that, and the same thing that Jenna was sharing with us about community, if you ever get in situations where you're in your planning, you feel like you're isolated and alone, because we do spend a lot of hours on our own working on things. Know that there are people out there who will lend a hand. And it's not like putting together other types of events where people are thinking about profits and business and advancement. You have to remind yourself that, oh, we're all out here doing this because it's something other than ourselves. And there's a whole different goal and a whole different mindset. So with their encouragement, they would get calls from me sometimes when I was overwhelmed, and they just kind of get me back on track. And they said, if you need any more help, we're here to do it. So once I start rolling with anything that I'm working on, it's more like, when you look at the overwhelming large scale of what you have to take care of, it can kind of set you back. But once I started breaking things down and going back to the goals that Bill and I had set, because I really wanted to keep this thing along the lines of what his desires were as well as mine, we were able to pick off our different vendors and pick out our different speakers and our musicians and put all the aspects of everything together that we wanted, which really turned into an incredible event. For the event itself, I don't think I have any regrets about anything we put forth. It just seemed like everything fell into place. It was as if Bill was watching us all the time. So we are moving forward into our next year. I'm already in planning mode, but it was nice that I was able to even share the story about Bill during the event when I was introducing some of our speakers. It's mainly the gangster vegan, Vinny DePaul, because the interesting thing is that the first day I met Bill, I was with Vinny, and the last day I saw him, I was with Vinny. So it made sense to kind of bookmark those meetings with Vinny and his introduction, even talking about Bill. So it was a nice way to make sure that he's always going to be valued and remembered with that event itself. So, odd story. And I know when I wrote to you about the hardship I had with the preparation of our event, you said, wow, we haven't heard that before.
You're right. That's a new one. That's definitely a new one.
It's crazy. He's still a powerhouse in all the things we do with that forum and with this event.
Yeah, because succession is already difficult enough, right? But when
yeah, I almost didn't have it. And the one thing that kept me moving was thinking, you know what? Bill brought you to something that is directly engaged with your passion. Do not let it go.
Right. Wow, that's a story. These examples are so interesting because they're so different. But thank you for sharing, Richard. That's incredible. And
Thanks.
congratulations for persevering. That's a wild story. Wow. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, Megan, what's your calamity?
Yeah, Richard, thank you for sharing your story. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. I'm on the board at Indy VegFest in Indianapolis, Indiana. We are kind of a younger VegFest. We put our board together in 2016. We held our first event in 2017. And so we tend to have interesting day of event type issues. So at our first VegFest in 2017, we had some electrical issues. So our venue was older. We had a lot of food vendors who were like plugging in these, double hot plates. I see Helene shaking her head. I remember a moment where, the ATM was unplugged in order to snake an extension cord to a food vendor. And from that, we felt like, oh gosh, we really want to learn from this. We had circuit breakers that were popping and, food stations were going down. So we, got a plan together for the next year. For 2018, for our March 2018 event, we had a new venue. We asked all of our vendors about their appliances that they were bringing, what wattage are your appliances, made absolute sure we knew exactly what our electrical needs were, got in touch with our venue. They assured us, yes, we can do this based on your floor plan and your wattage needs. This is fine. We do this kind of stuff all the time. We've had similar shows to this. So we thought, great, problem solved. This is the year of no electrical issues. And then during our first hour, we have an early access hour. So our event is free, but paid ticket holders can come in early during the early access hour. So during that hour, as the food vendors are getting up and running, we start losing circuit breakers and losing power. And that's also the time when the health department was there. And, we had invited food writers from newspapers, and they're there. And so everyone has paid to get into this early access to enjoy the food before everybody else. Our health department people are there, and the electricity on the first floor is it's going out and just failing. And our vendors can't keep their food at a safe temperature, so they can't even serve it. Without their equipment, they're not allowed. If they don't have the right temperature, they can't serve, and the health department is there, so they're not serving. So everybody's kind of like, welcome to VegFest. Thank you for the early access ticket that you bought. You're gonna have to wait on the food. So we ended up having to call an electrician, and they showed up, said that the entire building needed to be rewired, was, surprised that anyone thought we would be able to use all of these appliances. So the biggest thing, we were able to eventually get everything up and running with some electrician tips and tricks, but the big thing that we learned was to get everything in writing, because we had experienced that the year before. We thought we had solved it, but we never had in writing from that venue, a written assurance that yes, we can support up to this number of appliances at this wattage. We can guarantee that the electricity will work. So it became this kind of moment of, we had all these promises and it's not happening, and then there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. So that was an exciting, we thought we solved the problem, and it came back. So another thing that we should have gotten in writing, same venue, maximum occupancy. So we noticed that their website listed occupancy at only 1,000, but the venue's ginormous. And so we, talked to the venue staff, and they assured us, that's just what the fire marshal has given us. We actually are going to have the fire marshal come and reassess the max occupancy, because we know it's more. So we're going to do that by the time your event happens. Our event in 2017 attracted 4,500 people. So the 1,000 is not quite large enough, but the venue is much larger, so everyone would have fit. Well, we start getting closer to VegFest. We're still noticing the website says 1,000 occupancy. We're trying to contact the venue. We're not hearing back. And then finally, less than 2 weeks before the event, we hear from them, oh, we decided not to do that. So occupancy is at 1,000. So people are actually standing in line now for our event, and there's 4 volunteers to welcome everyone in, who are welcoming 1 and 2 people at a time, because we're literally not allowed to invite any more people into the building unless more of them leave. So another thing that we wish we had gotten in writing, this promise that, we will have the fire marshal come and reassess the occupancy, because then we wouldn't have had the issues with the lines and people getting in. So always some exciting day of stuff for us here.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, like another great example again, it's just something that is completely different from what we've heard before. Well, except for the intersectionality there with Helene and the health department. But I can't even imagine. You guys must have been stressed out of your minds, all of you. So on that note, so Helene, given what happened to you with the health department, let me ask you this. First off, this is a question, I guess, for everyone, but do you begin to document some of these lessons learned? Have you documented them, or did they kind of reside in your head?
I'm the worst person to ask that. I keep a majority of what happens and what I do in my head.
Okay.
I use Google Docs to track my vendors and all of that, and I have accounting software and an accountant, a CPA to help with the money. But I have the ability to remember a vendor saying, I don't want to be in this spot next year, so I don't like being next to the food. And I know at the next event that they attend that I put them someplace else. I just remember it. And I have all these lessons. I go to a lot of events. I think you all know that. I travel to a lot of Vegfests and I help at the events. And I see things ahead of time that make me go, oh, it's not going to work. Because in 2015, I did that. So I learned that I'm not going to do that again. Then I go to an event that's doing what I had done. And I'm like, well, I can't do anything about it now, so let's just make it work.
Right.
But you're not going to want to do that again. So that's what we all learn. And our group on Facebook is really a space where we all write that. We can search it and go back. And everything you guys write, I tend to read. And I'm like, I don't want to create the mistake and then have to correct it. So if you go through something, like that occupancy thing, I blow that away, but I don't have a fire marshal that comes to the event in Durham. Hopefully they're not going to pay attention to this. In Wilmington, the fire marshal came and said we were fine. So, and I'm pretty sure we were above occupancy at events. So in New York City, I know with Sarah's event, they've had the line where they had to let people in based on who was going out. And that line the first year was, I waited 2.5 hours to get in with the threat of leaving and coming back, but after waiting so long.
Yeah.
So I should do better. I almost feel like that Facebook group is where we just put everything and then email.
Right. Okay.
We hear from the public and we hear from the vendors, and I value when it's valuable, when it's constructive, when it's not attacking and mean. Right. I will morph and change the events based on the feedback.
Okay. And how about other guys? Have you documented these things, or is it just reside with you as?
I used to kind of do what Helene did, just kept everything in my head, and then I realized once our team grew, and it was more than just about me, it was about our group and about how we can all improve each other's event coordinating and directing. We've kept everything in Google Drive since, and as we've grown, it's become a lot harder to keep track of things because personally I get scatterbrained. I forget who did what at what VegFest and which vendor didn't follow the rules and what. And I think those things are important to keep track of because most of the vendors that we have at events are very kind and respectful of our volunteers. But every now and then we have a vendor who is very rude and very disrespectful. And we don't, the expression of burn me once, shame on you, burn me twice, shame on me. And I feel that way. If we have a vendor back who is really rude and disrespectful to our volunteers, if we invite that vendor back, then we're just rewarding that behavior. And it's not inconsistency with VegFest values. So we, after every event, we do review our vendor list. And if there are any vendors that we would not invite back, we do mark out what the reason was and what they did to say that they're not welcome back next year, but we might give them another chance in the future. Or if it's an absolute no, we just want to know which vendors are being respectful of the rules and which are not. We also want to know like Helene said, like who's giving good feedback and is it constructive? Because you get a lot of people who are complaining about things that we have absolutely no control over, like the weather, or we had someone complain that there was too much bird poop in the grass, and it's like, what are we going to do about that? And I had someone yell at me about, she came up to me at the event and screamed in my face and said, this is not handicap accessible. And we specifically picked that venue because it was the most handicap accessible. And she was walking, she wasn't in a wheelchair, this woman. She's like, if I was in a wheelchair, I'd have a hard time. So I was like, can you tell me what your solution is? And she couldn't tell me a solution. So so that's the thing. If someone else can't tell you a solution, then there's usually not a solution, or there's one that's not easily, easily accessible. So I usually turn that question back on someone else if they ask me something that's not constructive. But if it is constructive, I do like writing those down and keeping them in our Google Drive with that specific event, so that when we are planning for next year, we can take that into consideration and see how we can improve. Even if something is maybe not so much constructive or we had tried addressing it, if it was important to someone, we can highlight that and say we really need to work on doing better on this because people are noticing it is something important. So I think documenting when you have a big group and you have a lot of events that you're keeping track of, I think that can be very useful for improving future VegFests, and Google Drive has been wonderful for our purposes.
All right. Thank you. Richard, I mean, it's kind of hard to anticipate that someone's going to pass away on you. I mean, that's just incredible.
Yeah, I didn't document that as I try to keep your partners alive. Documentation was key to what we were doing with reviving the VegFest, and I credit Humane greatly for having, it was really small, but a perfect set of notes on everything that had happened. Most of this stuff I could look at and say, well, I already know this from my other festival experience, which I brought forward with me, my calendars that I use, sort of mapping out the preview calendar that I shared with Bill and send things to him. Having a partner was great because it forced me to write certain things that I normally would keep in my head so I could send them to somebody else. But the Humane League, Lydia Chaudhry, that was who was highly active in putting their festival together. Lydia had a set of notes, and the most important part of the notes was the section about the health department in Philadelphia.
I bet.
That was a little bit more special than any other health department. They were extremely helpful to me, but they have a process that can drive your vendors crazy. Because there's a lot of things they have to do, and some of them maybe even need to come from out of town early on to take care of some of the things. But the stuff that I saw there in those notes about the health department, they're the kind of things that even I looked at thinking, you must have made a mistake. This can't really be true. There's no possible way anyone would go through this with the health department and still be able to bring vendors in. So that part was key. As far as my documenting other things that happen, I'm kind of like Helene, where I keep a lot of things in my head. On that website, or excuse me, on the Facebook forum, she mentioned also in that Facebook group, anytime there's something valuable, I always save that thread. Save the thread. I have so many threads saved in there, so I know when there's a topic I need to find out about, I can go back. That's great for forming that sort of, I think for events, I like to form something that's sort of the Bible that I'll be able to eventually one day hand to somebody else and say, here's how you do it. That Facebook page is the current Bible where you can go and just look up any category that you need and see all the ideas that are there. The things that I like that are on there, I'll always cut and paste as well and put them on my notes on my computer and write a topic on it. So I'm slowly trying to build something that will work. I trust my instincts, and I also trust my memory. And there are many episodes that have taken place during the planning that really stand out. There's some other things I'll tell you about later that cannot be forgotten.
Thanks. And Megan, I guess you're probably documenting now what you're hearing on Mac occupancy in the health department.
Yes, get it in writing. But actually, so there's kind of two kinds of documentation in addition to that documentation of expectations that we want to set with our venue, and on both sides, what they expect from us and what we expect from them. Like in addition to that, which every year we are kind of increasing like what we're able to get documentation about. But for planners, I think there's kind of like two kinds of documentation. There's that like day of institutionalized knowledge. So if we do have an electrical issue, who do we go to for that? So what we really try to do is empower the board and staff and our volunteers who are there consistently to act on behalf of Indy VegFest. So there's somebody who has dealt with this before. Every volunteer should know who that person is and that they know about that thing. So if a vendor is trying to plug in an appliance and it's not working for some reason, everybody should know, like, oh, go get Joe for that. And they should know who that is and what Joe might be able to do. So I think having that kind of we do tend to have some of that documentation that is more just, I know about a thing, but we make sure it's not just one person, that everybody kind of has their specialty or expertise, something they've experienced before that they were able to handle. That's the go-to person for that thing. And then the other type of documentation is, as Jenna was talking about, kind of that after event. How did it go? What could we do better? That feedback. So we do a number of activities to gather feedback. We invite vendors, sponsors, people who are involved to and kind of debrief afterwards. So we actually have them come meet us in person. We do kind of a roundtable focus group around how it went, what could have been better, and then that allows us to tackle some of those problems and issues as a group. So hopefully they will be solved for the next year. We also send out a volunteer survey and an attendee survey so we can kind of reach even further on what do we need to increase our knowledge of and plan for throughout the year, so that on the day of the event, everybody knows what to expect and is empowered to make those expectations real.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Let me go a little bit in reverse order. I mean, you just brought up volunteers, and I'm thinking of Jenna's example where everybody bailed, or a lot of people bailed. Do you guys feel, is it best to over volunteer? Just take more people than you can actually use and expect a certain fallout? What do you think, Megan? Let's go in reverse order.
Yeah, we have a number of volunteers, and I think that some of the feedback we've gotten from volunteers in the past is a little bit on that, maybe you have too many, oh, I came to volunteer and I didn't have as much to do as I thought. The benefit is we do put a schedule together for those volunteers, so everybody knows ahead of time at least what their responsibility is during that time. Now, maybe nothing really comes up. Maybe you're a vendor liaison for an hour, going around checking on vendors, everything's great, you're just getting them water and there's not a whole lot to do. It's probably the best possible experience for being a vendor liaison. But you have a schedule ahead of time, so you know that the next 30 minutes you're free, so you can grab some food, you can check out the vendors, you have time to actually experience the event. So I think we would tend to lean on the side of over volunteering and having people who are just kind of around, who maybe will do more of experiencing the event than they thought they would as a volunteer, than not having enough. Because I think the big thing too is just making sure if those volunteers know how everything's supposed to work and they feel empowered to, answer questions and help people, and maybe they're on this job for an hour but something else pops up, they know about it, they did the walkthrough ahead of time or whatever, they have that empowerment to go and take care of that. So I think more volunteers who are pretty empowered, who don't have to feel oh, I'm just told to stand here all day, and if standing here and wave at people, and if that doesn't work, I don't know what else to do, they'll know what else to do. So you have maybe more than you need, but they're not just kind of collecting in the corner with no sense whatsoever of what's supposed to be happening.
Okay. But do you do volunteer training in advance? In case you have new people or?
Yeah, this is something that we need to get better at. As we've had multiple years, it's nice because we tend to have a lot of the same people who are at the last one. So it's easier to just kind of communicate with them through email and phone calls and oh yeah, it's going to be just like last year, you're going to do this. We're starting to do a lot more of sending out personalized email to the volunteers that are based around what it is they're going to be doing at the event, so that they're not getting bombarded with every possible thing, but they're getting sent the specific, here's what we need you to do, here's everything you need to know for that kind of approach and position and what you're going to be doing. We would definitely suggest to everybody, if you have volunteers who are kind of more I mean, really anybody who wants to come, but especially if you have volunteers who are kind of like leads or really key, get them in the venue earlier. So we go to the venue the night before and we stuff our swag bags and, you know, get everything set up. And that's the time for everyone, you know, us to walk everyone through and kind of go, this is going to be this, you know, this is where people are going to get drinks, that kind of thing. So getting people in the day before or even more ahead of time and kind of walking them through the experience of, you know, people are going to come in here and then they're going to go over here and like literally doing like almost that role playing of like, and then they'll come here and then hopefully they'll go to the vendor area here, helps everybody just feel comfortable in the space and comfortable that they know what they need to be doing.
Okay, thank you. By the way, everybody who's out there, we are going till 3:30 today, so we have a little bit more than a half hour. But if any of you have to leave us in the coming hour here as we turn the corner toward 3 o'clock, if you would complete our survey for us before you leave, that has been posted into the chat, we would really appreciate it because we do appreciate your feedback. And we hope that you can stick with us till 3:30. But I want to ask other folks here. So Helene, do you feel like it's wise to over volunteer, get too many volunteers, or how do you deal with that?
Well, I just had a conversation with Lee in Atlanta, and she had a volunteer issue at her event that just passed in November. A significant number of people just didn't show.
Okay.
And I was already thinking, because I feel that events that are aging
Mm-hmm.
or maturing have issues getting volunteers. And that might be, Jenna might be having that problem. Newer events, the community's like, yes, I want this to happen. And then it just keeps happening. And then they just kind of think it just happens without you. Like we don't need you anymore. We need volunteers. Like, it won't work without them. I do a pretty skeleton crew at Triangle. I think I had like 20 volunteers. You know, 2,000 people, 80 vendors, inside, outside. I didn't have the outside before. I managed the outside, which included getting motorcycles moved off the street, and with the hotel that knew but didn't know about the event. And I was like this frizzy hot mess because it's the middle of August in North Carolina. And then I walked inside to see what happens. I left the inside, all the volunteers, to get set up. And I was like, I can't do that again. I need more help. I mean 2014 first year, amazing. Not a single issue, actually. 2015, someone who was working with me dropped out, and I like almost single-handedly did the event. And I was a walking zombie at the event in 2015. I said, I'm never doing that again. 2016, 17, 18, I've grown, I've matured. I don't have to apologize as much at the event as I needed to, because it wasn't exactly nice all the time. It was stressful. But I've grown to the point where taken on like a mini me who's Mackenzie, and she's amazing. So I just actually threw all people calling me at her, and she's the volunteer coordinator. So the volunteers don't have to come to me and ask me questions, because I'm busy with the vendors and making sure everything else is going all right. And then we do have core people who have helped every year. I don't have access to the venue the day before in Durham. In Wilmington, I did. It helped. All these suggestions are fantastic. I mean, I do believe that there's something going on with events that are more mature, and that the community gets more maybe apathetic. They just think it just happens. Like, this will just happen. I'll just show up, and the event will be there, and it'll be just like every other year. And that's not the case. The less volunteers we have, the more stressed the organizers are, and the more work gets on. Because if somebody doesn't do something, guess who's going to do it?
Right.
I'm going to do it. And because that's, to me, I'll know then that it'll get done. I think all of us probably have one thing in common, is that we're all probably control freaks of some sort or nature. Because I don't know how you do this without having that. I'm better at it now, We have to give up in order to grow, right? Because it won't work otherwise. And, you know, having multiple events, as Jenna and I have, to touch on that for a second, like I write a lot of stuff down now, but when it was only Triangle, I could tell you like where your vendor booth was 2 years ago. Add 2 more events,
Right.
cities in multiple states, and my brain's full. I'm up to here, and I find I have to. I miss things, and that's why. I mean, I'm bringing in. I have like a team. I want the team to be more and more involved. I need to, as Richard touched on, I need to take this so that it can, I mean, I turned 49 yesterday. I can't do this forever. I have to mold somebody into doing this so that when I don't want to run around and stress myself out and get my soul sucked, that I can give it to somebody else and say, here's a successful nonprofit that makes money. Keep that going. Carry the torch and go.
Right.
You know, and then by then it'll be like, you know, like 10 VegFests. It'll be awesome.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. But let me switch this up a little bit for Richard and Jenna then, because you guys spoke of don't forget that you can lean on your network. So to what extent then would you sort of over prepare within your network as opposed to, I'm not saying your volunteers aren't your network because they are, but to what extent do you think you should be more prepared by leaning some on, you know, the folks who are really going to be there for crunch time and who have organized these things before and think about your community differently? How would you balance that between the volunteers and the folks who are really have your back on organizing?
Well, you want to go? I'm going to go. Jenna.
Okay.
Well, if I can stick to the volunteer portion, and the only reason I choose to stick there is because in our community, as far as the VegFest is concerned, we don't have any who have done it, except for the people from the Humane Society. But the people who were in charge of VegFest, they moved away. They weren't even in the region anymore. So there was a time to look for others who maybe wanted to step up. And one of the times when I almost gave up, I did put a message out, and I wrote it in such a way that the only people who would respond would be those who really knew how to run a festival. And some people stepped forward. A lot of them became vendors, but it kept me moving. And like I said, Carlo and Carmela, they were really supportive, and they even said to me, you shouldn't leave this. You have the passion and the ideas. We'll work behind you whatever you want. Just don't leave it. We think you can pull this off. But
Right.
Getting back to the volunteers, from the volunteers that I had, I think I had just the right amount to cover the jobs that I knew I needed to get done. I have a desire for more because there's some other jobs I'd like to put people to that are not crucial, but they'll make the event run even better. Mm-hmm. From that core group that I had for the first year, for the revival year, there's some who have already told me they're coming back, and I've already identified that, wow, I can make a nice cool group there for people who actually want to do this work and who understand how this type of event works. And some of them are also from the direct Philadelphia vegan community. I think somehow I lucked out to where we just had enough of the jobs that I'd put out there, and I used the Sign Up Genius app online to send out jobs and the brief descriptions that are there. I think I timed it really well a few weeks before the event, that were enough for people to schedule and plan so that they could be there, but not so far in advance that people would wonder, well, when is this event ever coming, and lose interest and disappear. I think out of those that signed up, only 2 didn't show up, and 1 just came at a different time. But it was paced out throughout the day where people came and they would take over the duties according to the schedule. They weren't late. I made sure there was a lot of food there for them, and made sure they also had time to go enjoy the event itself. So I think from those people, you start to identify who's really on board. And some were just way over the top enthusiastic. And I was able to say, you know what, within the work you're going to do, keep that, because you're waking me up. I haven't slept all night, and it's infectious. And we had some that were all over the place, smiling and doing the work right. That was just perfect for the day. So I gave people really freedom to use their personalities as long as they were getting the work done. And one of my best friends came out there with me who showed up at whatever 5 or 4:30 in the morning when we had to meet the parking authority, start moving cars. You know, he met at my house with a truckload of his stuff, truckload of my stuff, and he knows me so well that like during the day he was coming back and saying things to me about either a vendor or someone from the health department had told him we need this, this, and this. He said, I think what needs to be done is, I said, you know exactly what to do. I said, I just didn't want to step on your shoes. I said, as far as they know, you are part of Philadelphia VegFest, and people are coming to you, so just handle it. We've known each other since we were 10 years old. I trust you. Go. So he was out there as like the number 2. I said, tell him you're one of the directors, whatever you need. So he was out there handling things too. So
Great.
Close friends and trusted volunteers who become new friends are part of that core.
Right. Thank you. What do you think, Jenna? Thanks, Richard.
I think balancing volunteers with core members it's kind of circumstantial depending on each event. So I've been involved with probably around 12 to 15 festivals annually. And I've been involved not just with Solutionary events, but also with other organizations. I've worked with Tampa Bay VegFest, Central Florida VegFest, Central Florida Earth Day, Gainesville VegFest. And I've seen all these different groups that I've worked with all handle volunteer situations a little bit differently. So I've learned kind of what works best, what doesn't work so well. And I've also learned that it doesn't apply to all VegFest either, because I've seen some groups where they have a lot of members, a lot of core volunteers, and which is great that there's so many people interested in getting involved, but then you have so many opinions. And to have a group meeting and to have to decide on one thing, it can take a long time, and it extends the planning process far beyond sometimes what's necessary. And so if you have a small group, say 5 or 6 members, it can be a lot easier to make decisions and make them quickly and effectively and efficiently. However, I have seen really large groups work very well together. Gainesville VegFest has a very large support group, and they all do a phenomenal job of putting together Gainesville VegFest. Central Florida VegFest and Central Florida Earth Day are 2 of the largest vegan festivals in Florida and 2 of the largest in the country. And we run off of 5 members, five core people, and then we have a handful of other people that help out with tasks like running the animal rescue zone and running the artist corner and some other areas that we fill in as well. But it's really just a small handful of people that put on these really large events. And we start the planning for these events only a couple months before the event, and they're huge. We have over 250 vendors, close to 300 vendors at Earth Day, and we only start the planning maybe 2 or 3 months beforehand with a small group of people. But because we have a small group of people, we're able to work more efficiently. But if you're a brand new VegFest, and because this event, Central Florida VegFest, has been going on for 13 years now, Central Florida Earth Day has been it's going to its 14th year. So it's an experienced event. We don't have any hard time with volunteers. Everything runs, relatively smoothly. Of course, we always have the calamities, but with a new VegFest, you want to make sure that you balance with having enough people to cover each of your roles, plus maybe someone to fill in case it doesn't work out. Because when you're bringing in new members, you're likely to have someone that thinks they know the commitment, and then they start doing the work and they realize, no, this isn't for me. And so you'll have cancellations in the planning committee in that process. So I think in the beginning, you want to bring in as many people who want to get involved, but limit it to not having too many opinions, and making sure that your core team is a small group that you can really work well with, and then maybe having some outside people that help out, that are committed to helping out the day of the event and leading some sections without being too involved in the decision making.
Okay. Thank you. Well, apparently I'm channeling the problem that Megan had with electricity, and I see for some reason my battery's gone down on my computer very quickly. So what I'm going to do is we are at 3:08. We only have about 20 minutes. I want to open up either discussion from people who are online and or anybody who wants to ask questions. Give you that opportunity now. And if no one comes forward with any questions or no discussion points, what I'd like to do is turn it back to you guys to give me off the cuff kind of your 3 top things that you got to do for scenario planning to avert disaster. But let's turn it over, please, to the people who are in the audience to see if they have any comments or questions or what have you. I'm going to run and grab it.
I'll take care.
And Leah, can you take over the moderation?
Hey, Leslie. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I'll be right back. I'm like, oh.
Actually, yeah, no, don't let your computer die.
No.
So this is Leah. I'm the program officer at VegFund. You can't see me, but you can hear me, and hopefully you've emailed me a little bit. We did get a couple of people say that they weren't sure what we were talking about or what Leslie was talking about when she mentioned the Facebook page. I think we have a couple people who are new here and they don't know what we're talking about. So briefly, one or some of you explain what it is, that Facebook group, and why it's been so important for the planning last few years?
I'm unmuted, so we have an event organizer group on Facebook. It's private. You can't see it unless you're in it. You have to request access to it and get approved. You are searched to make sure that you're actually an organizer of an event. They won't just let anybody in. And we post the good, the bad, and the ugly in the group. And it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's all over the country and it's all over the world. And it's amazing because we lean on each other, we support one another, we go to each other's events, we answer questions. When the newbie organizers show up, I've been on the phone with them for hours many times, to help them get their nonprofit, which I think I helped Indy with, right? Right, Megan? I helped you guys get your nonprofit. And we all have stuff that we know about, and we want to help. Well, I want to help as much as I can, and it seems to be the consistency with all the organizers. And it's valuable, as we've all said. It's not just the four of us that think it's invaluable. It's all of us, like all over. So
maintain consistency too, because when you have VegFest is a global movement, and I think each of us, we all do things differently, the way we coordinate events, but as far as the core values and the mission of what we're doing, I think it is really important that we are consistent with one another, because then we're supporting each other. And if one VegFest does something completely different in terms of values to another VegFest, then we're saying that VegFest is wrong. And instead of fighting with each other and creating hostility, this group is really great for bringing us together and finding a positive resolution to putting us all on the same page.
The best thing I think, one of the things I like most about it is that it's a safe space. So you can speak freely about something that may have happened with a particular vendor, just because you want to let others know, or you want to find out if there's been a similar experience. And you can really exercise your thoughts about how far can I go in this situation, or is it prudent for me to allow this type of thing? So it's what we learned there, I think, for the most part. It always seems to come back to make sure you have your guidelines set about what you need for your VegFest, so that when a problem arises, you can always go back and refer to it. But is it okay if we say the name of it? Others can.
It's only reason because it's large. You have it in front of you probably, right?
I don't have it in front of me, but it's Large Vegan Event Organizers. So there's a process to get in. It's not going to be bombarded by people who shouldn't be there. But I highly recommend it. I loved when I found it. It's a valuable resource.
Yeah, thanks. And we do have a forum as well on the VegFund site that I see it as not a competitor to this site, but just a place where if people want to go deep into conversations, they can pop comments on there. So for those of you who maybe are not part of this Facebook site, or what you're looking for an alternate venue, you can pop some of your comments into that VegFund site as well. So thanks.
I think there is one other one. Isn't there one VegFest around the world?
That's for sure VegFest, I think, and for letting the public know about all the different VegFests that are going on.
Leslie, while you were away, we have folks talk about the Facebook group, and we have had a couple of other questions come in.
Okay.
So here's a question. This is just, I think this is helpful. for everybody, what suggestions can you share for new VegFest in regards to communication with vendors, speakers, and groups that are coming in? And I guess that this person's been starting something, a vegan expo, a university vegan expo in Canada, and confirming vendors has been more difficult than expected.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think like one of the biggest pieces of advice we have is just over communicate. It's so much better to over communicate than to under communicate. Another thing that you can do, one thing that's been really valuable for us on our board is we have really leaned on our community, our vegan community here in Indianapolis, to be a part of our board and to act as advisors for us. So we have this amazing vegan chef who owns her own business, owns a food truck, vegan food truck. She knows everything there is to know about mobile food, right? And restaurants bringing food in. And so when we're not hearing from people, like she relates to us the experience of what it's like to be a vendor. And she can tell us, is that normal? What else could we do? Like she just knows everything about that world that we don't know. So if we're trying to communicate and we don't hear back, like find someone who knows that world and those organizations and can help you understand, like maybe it's just that email doesn't work, or maybe it's just that you should expect to wait a week or two and you need to send it earlier. So leaning on expertise of people in the vegan community who can help you understand those groups you're trying to reach out to and their communication needs, and not just how you want to communicate, but how they're actually going to be able to and want to communicate back to you. You know, there's groups of people who are easier to get a hold of on Facebook than through email or a phone call. So if that's the community you're working with, like talk to someone from that community about how they prefer to be communicated with.
I want to add on to that. When we started in 2014, I wrote to Demetrius in New York, and his piece of advice, he gave me the best piece of advice, which I've given to many new VegFests. He looked up in North Carolina to see when the next VegFest was, and it was Charlotte. And he said, can you get there? And I was like, I can get there. And he said, okay, you need to go. You need to go and you need to meet with the vendors. You need to speak with them. You need to tell them that you're thinking about doing an event in the Triangle and see if they're interested. Simple as that, face to face. I've recruited vendors from Las Vegas VegFest to come to North Carolina. So I go to the VegFest, I speak to the vendors. I know a lot of them now, but I meet the new ones. And the biggest thing when we were brand new that got vendors to be like, do I want to spend money on this event that has no history, because that's what you're up against, was my enthusiasm for the event. Is that I was like, this is going to happen, it's going to work. In my mind, I had the number of people I wanted to attend. I didn't verbalize it to anyone because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be like, oh, I said there's going to be this many people, and like 400 people showed up. But in my mind, I had 2,000 people. In our first year, we had 2,000 people. And it was all about, like, you have to come, you know, like, this is the best, you know, it's a VegFest. You wouldn't want to come to a VegFest, right? So that's,
we're getting people involved. I think having the help of other VegFests that were successful really helped us out, because vendors who hadn't heard of VegFest before, I was just like, I was listing up all the other VegFests that I knew of that were really successful, and I was saying, like, well, you know, check out Central Florida VegFest, and this is an example of what our event's going to be like. And it was helpful because the president of our board is the founder of Central Florida VegFest and Earth Day, so we had his name to drop as well and say, well, he's involved in coordinating this too, so if he's successful, then we're going to be successful. And I think if you're starting off a new event, it's great to network with someone who has the experience and name drop and just say, we're working with this person, and just make sure that with that person that's okay. But that definitely helps people to say, okay, there's a legitimacy behind this, and, you know, they'll join in.
I think, you know, the great points you guys have all made. I think it's fantastic. And I'm thinking back to when I used to work on that other festival. When we first started, it was hard to answer certain questions. The vendors definitely, they'll always ask you, how many people will be coming? Because, you know, a lot of them this is their livelihood. They move around and they want to make money. So they have a formula in their head as to how many people they need to see so that it's worthwhile for them to go. Who else will be there, they want to know. And like Helene said, it has a lot to do with your enthusiasm. When you're talking to them about this event that you know is going to be fantastic for whatever reasons, they buy into it. One of the things I found, kind of stumbled on this by mistake. A lot of us, when we're planning, we wonder, why isn't anyone reading the things I'm sending? They're asking the questions about the stuff I've just sent out the week before. And I was talking to one of the vendors, and I got to know a lot of them pretty well, thanks to the health department, because I was helping them with different things. And that helped, because they saw the lengths that I would go to make sure certain things were getting done for them. And they suddenly were helping me because they were reaching out to other vendors saying, I'll tell him how to do this. I know you have other things to do. You've helped me so much. Thank you so much. But one thing I learned when I was talking to one of them, he was asking me questions, and I said, one of the things we were providing is the full setup for the vendors, make sure they had tables, chairs, and the canopy, which they all loved because we hate having to pack more stuff in when we don't have to. And I asked one of them, I said, did you read the stuff I sent you about the canopy? So we have the whole setup. They said, this is the greatest thing in the world. We love this. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Are you so busy that with VegFest that you don't know which information came from whom because you're just always preparing for another VegFest? He said, yeah. He said, we can't remember whose detail said this, whose detail said that. And then he apologized. He said, I'm so sorry. I said, no, you're helping me. Because what I know now is I need to throw this in your face over and over and over again so that you know this is my VegFest that's giving you the canopies so you don't show up with stuff you didn't even need to pack. They said, that's exactly what it was. They said, they just all blend. He said, I'm doing this every weekend so I forget whose details are what. So like Megan was saying, just bombard them with information because think about how hard it is just to control the things that we have, and we have to remember what vendors do and what, and we're going through all the information. So putting it in front of them a lot is a great thing. And I found after the event, we were lucky to have a very successful event. I had vendors, even when they were showing up, in their first few minutes, they're telling me, this is the most organized load-in I've ever seen. We're so glad we're here. And that just flowed throughout the event. Luckily, we didn't have any mishaps. And I still have them telling me about that experience. And they have already shared with other vendors, you got to go to Philadelphia. I made money there. It was organized. We didn't have this headache. So I have other people calling me who have just heard about the success of the event saying we want to be part of this because so-and-so told us. So they all see each other all the time. And a lot of them in the reverse, they can say, you don't want to go through what we went through and wherever, and that'll keep people away. So that experience helps. And your demeanor has a lot to do with it. If you're happy to be doing it, they know it. It's infectious.
Yeah, the emails are incredibly important. I'm detailed. They get emails starting at least like a month and a half out for the annual event. And I repeat myself every email. Old stuff, and then when I get questions that I didn't answer, I just send an email to everybody because if one person's thinking it, they're probably all thinking it. So it's like here, and then as a frustrating point, this will come up. The people who don't read, oh my gosh, it's that's my home is a safe place. The home is where I can say and do anything that I want, But outside when I walk out the door, it's like, oh, okay, but. Please read. We spend a lot of time formulating.
Responded to emails where the answer to the question was in the email that they responded to asking the question. So I think sometimes phone calls can help too if you have enough time and if you have enough volunteers on your planning committee. If you can break up like our vendor list is usually over 100 vendors. So if you break it up to, this person calls 20 vendors, this person calls 20 vendors, and you just break it up. If you have something that's really important to get across and you want to make sure that vendors, like for example, we're switching our policies to making sure that everyone does not bring single-use plastic bags or straws to the events. And so for vendors, a lot of them, it's really a new concept for them. So it's on top of the contract, the emails, the 3 other emails that we send out, all of that is usually not enough to guarantee that they're going to follow the policies. So we usually make phone calls to food vendors to go over how can we help you to find the compostable cutlery that you need and to be that support for the vendors. And I think one, they do appreciate it because we've had some vendors that will have never heard of compostable cutlery before and we'll tell them how to get it and where to buy it from. And at first they're a little bit put off because it's more expensive. And then after the event, they're like, you know what, actually this is great. People really we're really proud of us having these items to give out. And we've had some vendors who asked us about transitioning their entire business to being eco-friendly after the event. So that was, really encouraging to see that not only is the event having an impact on the public, but it's also having an impact on the vendors and what their values are going to be after the event.
All right, thank you. Whew, that's great information here. I'm glad we're recording it. According to my clock, we have about 6 minutes. And since we're all incredibly enthusiastic, I'm going to throw out, well, Leah, are there more questions out there from the audience?
Yeah, we did have one question from Nige in Baltimore. She asks, indoor versus outdoor venue, what do you think? There are pros and cons to both. Yeah, do you all have some quick thoughts? Maybe just give your 2 cents.
I think indoor, outdoor.
I've done both. I'm kind of jonesing for an outdoor event again because I moved indoors. First year, always indoors. That's my advice. Never go outdoors first year. There's too many extra expenses. Indoor, you have electricity. You don't leave tables. You have chairs. You're covered. You don't have to worry about weather except for hurricanes and blizzards. But who does this in the winter? So much easier. Volunteers want to come inside. The vendors prefer indoors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Megan?
Yeah, well, we're in Indianapolis, so we only have warm weather and sun for like 4 days a year, which makes outdoors a bit harder. We do get a lot of questions from guests about outdoors because our event is in March, and so there is occasionally like warm days in March, and people are like, we want to go outside, but we definitely prefer indoor. Just, yeah, the vendors prefer indoor. It's easier to manage the volunteers. The volunteers can have their own room to go to. It's easier to deal with the food and serving food and getting all of the food in the correct, compost and recycle bin when it's all indoors and there's signage and all that kind of stuff. Our venue for next year does have kind of like a porch area, so we always have this like flirt with disaster of like, is there some way we could, put something out there for the people who do want to go outside? And then if it ends up not happening, we just won't do it that day if it's raining or it could be snowing or whatever. But for us, indoor is just a much, much safer bet. It did rain like crazy at our first event in 2017. So we were very thankful to be inside.
Thank you. And Jenna, you're in Florida where it rains and is very hot. So are you an indoor lady?
Actually, no. We've only had one indoor event. All of the other events have been outdoors, and we just cross our fingers. And we've actually been extremely lucky. We did have one, a torrential kind of hurricane tropical storm scare for one of our events, but it happened like right at 6 o'clock when like we were packing up and getting everything out. So we actually haven't really had an issue. We call our president our lucky charm. Whenever we bring him, it doesn't rain. So yeah, I would say it's completely dependent on location. Florida is so sunny and beautiful that people want to be outside. They want to enjoy, having an outdoor event, and it's a lot easier to have a lot more vendors, have a lot more activities, and not be confined to an indoor building where potentially you have, speaker audio issues. And so outside tends to be a lot better for us. But I would say that question can go on for hours because it's really dependent on a lot of different factors, mostly location.
I know. I was thinking you could do a webinar on indoor-outdoor. What do you think?
My preference is outdoor. That arts festival I used to run, we gambled with that thing because it was the right period of the year. We were in May when we did that event. The funny thing about that is we did that for about 6 years. The first year we didn't have it. We had great weather for all those 6 years. The first year we didn't have it, it poured on that same day. It was coming up to VegFest, when Bill and I were planning originally, he said, I don't want to do one indoors. He said, I went to an event one time, and he just said, he said when he got inside, he was in a beautiful city, and then all of a sudden, everything just lost the vibe of the city. Philadelphia is a city that you need to experience and have all around you. So the place where we are right below South Street on Bainbridge Green, it's a gorgeous block, and that'll be 2 blocks. It's a split block where you've got the ability to have this oval movement. There are wide streets on both sides of the block, and then the center is divided by these huge trees. They have a beautiful canopy that hangs down over. It's a great setting. It's a little warm. We had no rain. It was a crazy rainy season in the beginning of June, and Courtney in Lancaster does hers outside in a beautiful park. And we both had the same fear because all we saw on the weather forecast were just the storm clouds. Her Saturday was beautiful and sunny. It rained at the end of the day on her Saturday and then poured all day the next Sunday. We had the repeat weekend when we did ours in Philly. It was beautiful all day long, about 80 degrees, sunny. It drizzled a little at night when we were gone, and then that Sunday it poured.
Oh, wow.
It worked out. I always tell my friends, sometimes I joke, I think I control the weather according to what it is I need to do. I won't take that too far, but hopefully it will always work with us.
Yeah. Well, may the sun shine on your VegFest is all I can say. Well, we are at the time, and I can't thank all of you, the panelists, enough, but I also can't thank enough the people who also wanted to participate. Your willingness is duly noted. And when we have another opportunity, we'll be calling on you. And so again, thank you everyone for the work that you're doing out there. Thank you for joining this webinar today. Keep it up. We hope to hear from you, and I'm really impressed. And this was a great panel because we had people who are very experienced and have done these things for years. To Richard's example of what sounds like a very quick succession, and Megan saying, well, our VegFest is kind of new. So it was really just a great spectrum of experience. And thank you, everyone. And have a wonderful weekend. And we look forward to hearing from you.